Shackleton's Captain is about an extraordinary expedition to the South Pole. It was a failed expedition. The captain of the ship was a man named Frank Worsley. He's not been expunged from the history books, but he's not very well known in the history books because the leader of the expedition, Ernest Shackleton, was a big noter and liked to be the centre of attention, so most of the history has Shackleton at the centre of the story. So this is a retelling of the story from Worsley's point of view.
Back in 2000, I sailed to the Antarctic Peninsula with the other producer on the project, James Hayward, and I'd been given the book, the biography of Frank Worsley. So we read Frank's story in the environment that it was set, and it had a major impact.
The question mark was whether or not we could tell an old story in a new, fresh and engaging way.
When I was researching this, I was really struck by how these individuals, and Frank Worsley in particular, was able to get over every obstacle that came before them and keep focusing on the end goal. He really, really never gave up. So there was a hurricane, then there's a tidal wave, then there's a mountain range. Each time one of those things came along, he was able to see past the obstacle to the final goal without giving up. And the suffering is so outrageous. I just think most of us, and certainly me, I would have been looking to take a swim.
Yet without Worsley, Shackleton had nothing. It's been said, I think, Shackleton led them, but Frank Worsley saved them.
Really, he was the guy who got them there, who saved them. Without his navigational skills, it is inconceivable that those men would have survived. Absolutely inconceivable.
I think history has overlooked Frank Worsley in a way that is actually shameful. Shackleton took all the credit for the expedition. In his own book, he barely mentions Frank Worsley. And the absolute fact of the matter is they do not survive the journey on the James Caird without Frank Worsley. There's a whole other series of events that Frank Worsley was crucial to, but that James Caird journey, they don't make it. If Shackleton's on his own on that boat, they don't make it. Without Frank Worsley, they all die. There's a number of things about Frank Worsley that are really attractive. He was an extraordinary navigator, an amazing sailor, but he's also incredibly humble and very, very loyal. In his own account of the expedition, he is forever praising Sir Ernest, and he underplays his own contribution a lot of the time, which is why I think he was partly overlooked.
I think Shackleton was eternally grateful, loath as he probably was to admit it, to have had Worsley along. Shackleton knew his limits. He tried to deny them. In those days, you just staunchly kept your face. You had a certain role to play. You had a public perception to maintain. And his job was to employ people to do the job, so the credit was his anyway. But he was in huge debt when he got back, and nobody's going to back a loser. If Shackleton would have come back and say, you know, if it weren't for Worsley, I would have been an absolute mess, then nobody would have gone to his speeches, his after-party speeches.
When we get to the end of the story, one of the most interesting elements is how Shackleton denied the glory that he himself so ardently sought to 4 of the members in the expedition who played a key role, and yet they were denied the polar medal. And I find that to be a very telling comment on the character of Shackleton.
Yeah.
The recreation really puts the audience in that spot. It puts them in with the initial explorers and helps them to experience the life that they endured over that period of that 2 years.
What was really great about the crew on this job is everybody connected with the story. And while it's not always required of film technicians, it's really fundamental to succeeding, I think.
We began up mountains in Queenstown with helicopters and cool stuff, and working with Charles, who plays Shackleton, and Hugh, who plays Cream.
Generally, when you are filming in the mountains, your biggest challenge is always going to be the weather, so that you're not top-heavy in the amount of gear and people and equipment that you've got, but you're appropriately resourced so you can deliver the screen values and get the shots that you need quickly and timely.
We shot the reconstructions of the crossing of South Georgia. The men had to cross a mountain range after having survived all these terrible ocean-going adventures. They then had to cross a mountain range. And we were lucky enough to shoot that in the beautiful setting of the New Zealand Alps. And I thought it was ironic that while shooting that part of the journey, these men who'd been through terrible, terrible experiences, the director got seasick in the helicopter and had to get out. So I thought there was an irony that I was so hopeless as an adventurer that swooping around in the helicopter in the mountains of New Zealand actually made me seasick, and I had to sort of take a break while these men had endured these terrible, 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 terrible hardships.
After that, we came back into a studio with a spectacular crew creating tidal waves. We've got giant storms, we've got ships tipping over. And all of this took place in a very small tank with hoses and buckets.
It's mostly been studio-based, my part of it. So we've been recreating Antarctic light in a studio, which has been not only a challenge, but also a great opportunity to explore different ways of lighting. You know, a lot of things which I guess on location would have been hard to deal with, and in the studio we had the opportunity to kind of control them and work with them and try and bring out the best of them.
You'd have to say that art department pulled the rabbit out of the hat. You know, Roger, Guys and his team in the art department were extraordinarily creative and resourceful, and they did it on nothing, on a shoestring budget. And you know, Roger said to me today that he's been waiting for this last shoot to happen and he couldn't really think about anything else and hasn't really wanted to work on any other jobs, and to which I gave him a hug. So, you know, Roger's been fantastic. You know, he brings old school sort of passion and vision to, you know, this great Kiwi story.
The biggest consideration with building the boat was, number one, the money available. Number two, the time we had to do the boat, put the boat together, how much of the boat we had to finish. If we weren't going to see aspects of the boat, could we save money somewhere? In the end, we had to build the entire thing, including the sails, because we wanted to show as much of that boat as possible, because so much of the adventure took place on the boat. When we were constructing, the process was, first of all, to find plans, or at least make up some plans that resembled the real boat. We did not have access to the boat that exists at Dulwich College. We spent a lot of time working out the dimensions of the James Caird. I had two excellent boat builders who had built small boats and were not just film technicians.
The James Caird was a beautiful boat. It was absolutely beautiful and extremely comfortable, actually, I might say. I was very impressed with its, with the detail of it. It was like, I guess it was like the real thing, and it felt authentic to be on board.
Leanne is fantastic. It's been great fun, and she has a wonderful sense of the human about it. I think a story like this, it's very easy to become, you know, boy's own heroics, where she has a great ability to go find what these characters are going through, find the humanity of their situation.
She is very focused about what she wants. That's very important in a director. It's very important they keep that focus on.
I didn't know it at the beginning, but I now realise that there would be very few directors who would have had the heart and the necessary endurance just to get to the end of this project and not feel as if they wanted to run away from it. As we moved into the final phase of this shoot, Leanne put as much energy into the project as she did on the first day.
It's been a really, really fun project for me because it's been so far outside my comfort zone. You know, it's an adventure tale, it's a dramatised film, it's working with actors in an environment that I've never worked with actors before, it's CGI, all those things. And you know, it's a little bit like when you get to my age, you don't often get to do something completely brand new. And every single element in this production was pretty much brand new to me. And that's kind of special. You don't get those opportunities that often over a certain age.
Being able to have the visual effects within the Shackleton's Captain film, I think has helped immensely bridge the gaps in the story that they didn't have pictures for. It helped add another level of excitement and drama to the story that may have been missed if they had to do it entirely as a studio-only shoot. Within the confines of the story, we had all this amazing footage from Frank Hurley, who was the on-set, cameraman of the time, and so we had a whole lot of really great historical archival footage to deal with up until Elephant Island. And then from Elephant Island, when they self-rescued themselves, we had nothing. So we had to come up with a solution for Leanne that enabled us to tell the story of these 6 men in the small James Caird as it went from Elephant Island back to South Georgia, and tell it in a believable way that didn't involve us having to recreate gigantic oceanscapes with a small digital boat.
The biggest problem about the CG water was needing to get the crest of the waves right. Water in itself has its own nature. It behaves differently depending on which way the wind is blowing, which way the current is going, and to get that within my eye to look right turned out to be quite a feat. So once we were happy with what it looked like, we then spent probably another 4 months on the project, taking it from being good and happy with the direction we were going to just really refining that look. We wanted to break that barrier down between CG and real-life footage so that you could not see the defining line in any way or form, where CG and reality just melded into each other and created the whole environment and really brought you into the story so that you could really relate to the characters, where they were, with the triumphs and the tribulations they were going through, and that you could just really get pulled into the story.
They never escape the elements. If they're in their endurance, if they're in the ship in the ice, they're being crushed by the ice. And if they're on their way back to South Georgia in this tiny wee dinghy, it's water and it's wind, and they can't escape that either. There was a lot of work that went into creating backgrounds for a lot of the recreated sequences. All of Frank Hurley's footage was mute, so that meant a lot of crowd sounds and dog sounds and activity, footsteps, and then with those sounds, carbon dating them in a way and winding the clock back so they believably lived in the period in which they were recorded.
I think it's been a huge success in terms of the passion that all the crew have displayed. I think the time that it's taken to shoot the film has been about exactly the same amount of time that it took the expedition to camp on the ice and then travel to South Georgia.
What will I take away from the project is a better understanding of the people who did great deeds, the people who went on great adventures, why they did it and how they survived it, really. I think from this I get a strong sense of every man was working for the other man. Their greatest fear when it was just the 3 of them crossing the ice was if they didn't get help, all of the other men would die. They would be lost. And that sense of nobility, in a way, or sacrifice is quite wonderful. And it's not nationalism, it's not heroism, it's a really fundamental sense of love and caring for comrades. So it's quite wonderful, really.
Have we succeeded? This is probably the best film that anyone will ever see in their lives. Is that too much? Is that okay?
About. Something maybe it's more realistic.
An epic adventure. 28 lives in peril.
In today's standards, it's like being on a space station cut loose.
A famous explorer and the man he turned to save them all.
He was responsible for all of them.
Frank Worsley, utterly fearless.
The inside story of Ernest Shackleton's doomed Antarctic expedition. Trapped and facing death, the men turned to Shackleton to lead them, but Shackleton needed Frank Worsley to get them home. A desperate rescue mission.
He was the navigator.
Trying to navigate to this pinprick of an island.
16 days, 800 miles. Worsley's navigational genius, their only hope.
If they were swept past South Georgia, that was it, and they knew that.
And this is where they began to realize just what a very, very special man he was.
The man history overlooked. The true hero.